Welcome to the commentary booth, where we watch and you guessed it, commentate on the week that was in movies and TV. I'm your host and play-by-play commentator, Jamie Apps, and each week I'm joined by a rotating cast of color commentators to help you find your next viewing treat. This week I'm joined by two very special guests. These people are documentary filmmakers who recently worked on a project which explored a subject matter near and dear to my heart: professional wrestling. Their new documentary, titled The Death Tour, follows wrestling hopefuls as they embark on the fabled Canadian wrestling tour run by Tony Condello. The Death Tour, as it's known, snakes its way through the remote Indigenous communities of Northern Manitoba in Canada in the middle of winter. Without further ado, let's get to the interview. Today, we're here to chat to our guests about their journey with documentary filmmaking and their latest documentary, The Death Tour. Welcome to the show, Stephan Peterson and Sonya Ballantyne. Ballantyne. Sorry, I knew I would stuff one of the names up.
Thank you, Jamie.
How are you guys doing?
Oh, good.
Great.
Nice to be out of the frozen wilderness, I assume.
Oh, it's still freezing in this part of the country. So
yeah, it got freezing again too.
Oh, great. So before we get into the Death Tour itself, I'd like to get to know you a little bit more and about your film and TV tastes, since that's what the commentary booth is normally about. What would you say are your favorite movies and TV shows? Maybe start with Stephan.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds good. What have I been watching lately? I'm a huge fan of Greg Whiteley's work. He's producer. He's done two of the shows that I've watched of his. One are Cheer, and the other is Wrestlers. And I've been working on this project for 8 years now, and it was just amazing to see that the year that this film finally got made, he came out with a show called The Wrestlers on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen it, but It is amazing. And his show Cheer, which was also an incredible, season one really was an incredible piece of filmmaking, was like an inspiration during like the early stages of this film, like its access and its storytelling. So, those are two pieces of documentary, film works that I really loved, and also was, a huge fan of Hard Knocks. So a lot of sports stuff. Yeah, that's what I got right now.
I guess for my inspirations for when we did this were probably like the traditional wrestling documentaries like Beyond the Mat and Wrestling with Shadows. But personally, like, I'm a huge fan of narrative film. Like one of my favorite film directors is Wim Wenders. But I only love his bad movies, so like Million Dollar Hotel, that sort of thing. I'm also a huge fan of Indigenous content right now, especially. I'm getting into Echo just because I really love Vincent D'Onofrio in various roles, and so I've also been really heavily into shows like Midnight Mass. Like, I'm always 4 years behind what's ever popular on Netflix. So like if it was popular 4 years ago, I'm probably into it right now. And I'm also looking at historical dramas like The Terror season 1. I really enjoyed, just because I have a friend who's currently working on a documentary about the Franklin expedition. So I'm like, I want to learn all I can so I can stow away on her documentary.
Very nice.
Have you seen, not to be the question asker here, Sonya, but have you seen the season 2 of The Terror? I've been trying to.
No, I haven't yet. I'm planning to, just because I love George Takei. So I've like just been falling behind. Oh, stop.
That is a great show. Yeah, The Terror is amazing. Yeah.
I will have to check that one out. But yeah, we just recently watched all of Echo, and I thought the Indigenous representation in that show is phenomenally well done.
Yeah, and I know about 700 of the people on it, so it's just like cool to see friends of yours and stuff like that in a Marvel show. I'm just like, oh my God, this is great.
So then, as we turn our focus onto the Death Tour, obviously this is a wrestling documentary. Did you have much of a background with wrestling before diving into doing this documentary, which was, did you say, taken 8 years?
Well, I've only been on it for about 4, like just under 4. But I have always been a wrestling fan. It was my dream as a little girl to marry into Bret Hart's family. That was my goal. Be trained by him or marry into his family, one or the other, or both. I have been watching it ever since I was a baby. It's one of my favorite things even now. And it was when I was first approached to be on the project, I was really compelled by Stephan's real look at what he wanted to talk about, because like again, like people think it is a wrestling doc, it is just like capital W wrestling documentary, but I knew he wanted to do more than just focus on the wrestling. It's like one of the biggest questions we ask is why they do it. And so that was always something that fascinated me about wrestling, because a lot of my favorites like China and Luna Vachon died in like tragic circumstances. So I always like wanted to know why, what compels. And so it was something that drew me to the project and to Steph in the first place.
I was not a wrestling fan. I kind of grew up playing hockey and also doing circus, so I kind of had a foot in like both worlds of, sports, but also performing. And I knew nothing about wrestling. I thought it was kind of silly, and I came across a tour by fluke one year, and was out in the middle of nowhere. Did not expect to see the show, and I came across it, and there are these like these full grown adults in their in their outfits doing all sorts of crazy moves in a ring 5 hours north of the nearest like city center, for these crowds that were just eating it up. And I was like, this is like I couldn't believe how these two worlds came together so beautifully. And so maybe a year later I was like, I was I was thinking, I was like, I'm looking for some projects to really sink my teeth into. And then I remembered this particular show I'd come across one night, a year ago while on another trip. And then that's when I looked into it, and turned out it was just this iconic tour. And so I started reaching out and like finding, alumni on Facebook, and doing like the whole Facebook sleuth thing, and speaking to wrestlers, and they were super friendly. And then, after about a couple months, I worked my way to an introduction to Tony, who's the promoter. And he called me on my birthday, and he's like, yeah, I'm into this, let's talk. So a couple weeks later I fly out with our colleague Joe, and sign him to like give us a year to try to get it off the ground. And then we had to keep making him sign it year after year after year, because it took us a long time. But yeah, so what you asked me, was I a wrestling fan? No, but it kind of, as soon as I started talking to them, I was like meeting these really fascinating people who were really sacrificing a lot to chase a dream. And that was cool. I mean, as a filmmaker, or someone who's trying to make a living in the arts, per se, I could really relate to that. They just kind of work gig to gig. They've always got a bag by the door. When the phone rings, you take the job, and it comes at the cost of financial security. It comes at the cost of a family life at times, or a regular, so whatever. And then so I remember hearing their stories and picturing what I saw in the ring a year ago, and I was like, this world is, I need to give this a second look. I've clearly been judging wrestling, and yeah, so now I'm a fan.
Yeah, there's nothing like a live wrestling show to capture someone and be like, oh, I'm a wrestling fan now.
I think so, but it also takes a little peek behind the curtain for me. Like if I just went to a wrestling show, I would have, I would have probably gotten into it. But it was as soon as I peered behind the curtain, that's what really piqued my interest.
So then, with the documentary, The Death Tour, you mentioned that it's a wrestling documentary, but it's much deeper than that. From your perspectives, what is the core the core of the story of this documentary?
I mean, for me, it's many things, but it's about healing. It's about these kind of two vastly different worlds, both, and so the one world is professional wrestling, and a lot of the cast that we followed had all kind of come from, they'd all kind of gone, wrestling had kind of come to them at a time when they were kind of at a crossroads in their life, or kind of helped pull them out from a dark time. And finding this new family, and finding something that they're passionate about deeply, was really cathartic to all of them. And then the healing, and then I don't, not to give too many spoilers to the film, but what one of our characters, Sage, kind of talks about in these towns is when she goes through these towns and they experience a suicide epidemic, is how these traditional forms of healing in some of these communities are forgotten, or are not forbidden, but they're not encouraged, let's say. And so for me, I just one of the themes, one of the big themes for me is healing.
Yeah. I think for me it was I'm always trying to prove myself in terms of like this is why I should take up space, like because as an Indigenous woman and a wrestling fan, I've always been like put down upon because like I'm not Indigenous enough and or I'm not a woman enough. And like when I was thinking seriously about becoming a pro wrestler, it was at the time when women like Sable were the WWF women's champion, and like I did not look like Sable and I would never look like Sable. And so I saw the glass ceiling for myself before I even began. It was really sad for me. And it was funny when this movie came into my life because I remember when Steph and I were first talking about it, I was like, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to make it a capital F film because I want everybody, even if they hate wrestling, like Hulk Hogan beat up their mom, whatever, like they hate wrestling. I want them to see this movie and go away with it knowing why I love it in general because it has healed so many people. It continues to do that. Like it's what Steph says, it's about healing. And it's about not just the wrestlers healing themselves through professional wrestling, but the kids finding heroes in the wrestlers themselves, seeing themselves in people like Sage or Des or Sean or Sarah. And it was something that I think we really succeeded in putting that across because I am so proud of how the film, like, I know it's my own film, so I'm kind of biased. Like, it's our film, like, I'm biased as heck about it. But I was so happy to see how wrestling fans took to it, like how people really appreciated the care we put into it. And it was something that I was really happy. Like, it took a long time for us to get here, but I'm like so happy we're here now. So.
Yeah, as someone involved in the Australian wrestling community, I can say that your film does a wonderful job of sort of highlighting the sense of sort of brotherhood, community, and belonging that wrestling can provide to a lot of people that I think is something that is kind of overlooked by lots of people outside of the wrestling bubble. And so did the story evolve from the story that you initially set out to showcase?
I mean, for me, yes. Initially 8 years ago, 6 years ago, it was mostly just about wrestling. And then, once I went on the tour for a couple of days, for research, and then once, with Sonya, we got together and then actually filmed the whole thing. Yeah, the whole community aspect and what happens through the film and the epidemic that the tour encounters was definitely not the direction. We were not expecting that to occur. So yeah, it's certainly involved. Yeah.
Yeah, it really changed because I think initially, yeah, like when I came on, we were gonna do some focusing on like the Indigenous communities because we found out that this well-known Indigenous politician in Canada was the reason the death tour started, and that was something that we were interested in exploring. But then ultimately, we were like, the question for me became like, well, why does Tony keep doing this? Because it's notoriously hard to get to these places. It's also notoriously expensive to get to these places. And so I was like, I didn't know how much he could possibly be making, like just doing this, but then to see how like because the tour itself is one of the only non-community created events that goes on in these communities, and it was just fascinating to see like that was why they kept coming back because they're embraced so wholeheartedly by the communities that they visit that people from like grandparents ages to kids who are like 4 have all seen the tour at some point or another. And it was just cool to see that like it's become a tradition. And I was really fascinated to find that because I was so nervous when we first went out there. I'm like, is this going to be about wrestling? And then ultimately, like wrestling itself, it wasn't just about the wrestling.
Yeah, I think something that the documentary highlighted for me was the community outreach aspect. Like I had known about the death tours for quite a while, but I'd never realized that it wasn't so much just drive to this town, put on a wrestling show, pack up, go to the next town. There is that whole community outreach aspect. Was that exciting for you guys to be involved and film some of those moments where just the pure love and joy that the kids get from those moments?
Yeah, for sure. The school talks. Well, there, for me, there was kind of two moments, right? There, like where the community outreach really happens, and where the wrestlers really go the extra mile. I found was the school talks was amazing, and it's because I think it was one of the conditions that Phil Fontaine had given Tony when he kind of got Tony, like, opened the territory up for Tony to go. He said, yes, you can go wrestle in these communities, but like you need to go with a message and talk to the kids and go to the school and take some time to go out and do that. And it's not a thing you really hear about a ton in a lot of the lore, right? A lot of the lore focuses on the road. And so that was amazing. And as filmmakers, a very great way to kind of open up into people's stories. But then of course there's during each match, before each match, during and after, where there's that exchange between the kids and the wrestlers. That really was with some of our favorite parts to be a part of in film.
Yeah, that was some of the coolest parts because I was a jaded person. I was like I was totally ready to not have the wool pulled over my eyes by the like wrestling carny and stuff like that. I was like, you're not gonna get me. Like I'm no mark. And then I was really touched by like I almost started crying the first night in Cross Lake when we had a fully like almost 99% Indigenous audience in Cross Lake. And when when Sage came out to the crowd, like I was almost crying because the kids were like freaking out. Like they had never seen somebody like Sage wrestling for them. And and when she spoke to the communities afterwards, it was very cool to see how the kids really listened to her because they're like, hey, she's like us. And so I think that this was the first tour that had, I believe, more than 2 girls. And also, this was the most Indigenous people that they've had on the tour. And so it was really cool to see how the kids reacted to seeing somebody like Wavell or Sage or Des, who look a lot like them, who were in positions that these kids wanted to be in. So it gave them this hope that because they heard that Sage herself was from a res, and so they were like, if she can do that, maybe I can. And so to see that happening in real time was just so. I was like, no one's gonna believe this if we show it, but I'm like, we gotta show it just because like I'm so prepared for other jaded people to be like, that's not what happened. And I'm like, no, I was there. It totally happened. So
And then, Stefan, you spent considerable time working in these remote Canadian communities through your time on Ice Road Truckers. Is it still just as daunting every time you go up into these remote places?
No, I've really, I love it. Like I was just thinking just the other day, I was like, now that we're done this, like I don't know when I'm gonna go back up. No, it's the road is not, when you're well prepared. It's not too bad. What I will do is pack a better mattress. I had 8 years to prepare, and I still bought a $20 air mattress off Marketplace the week before I left, and woke up on the floor every morning. So that was terrible. That was a big mistake. But no, I've really grown attached to these communities. I mean, they were so welcoming and kind. I mean, even, you know, we were in one town for 3 to 4 days because some of the communities we were supposed to go to had experienced a death, and so we were unable to go. They were closed down, so we ended up staying in one community for a long time, and even this community, while we were there, had or right as we were leaving, had experienced a death as well. And still everybody like went out of their way and brought us food, and we got to, we were working with community members in each town, and we got to really know a bunch of them. And so no, I feel like we made some friends in a few of these communities, and they're beautiful too. So it's daunting. No, I'd love to go back. So yeah.
Brilliant. And yeah, visually, the landscapes you showcased throughout the film are simultaneously mesmerizing, but also a little bit eerie as well. Is that sort of an accurate representation of the region?
I think so, yeah, because I think one of the things in Indigenous culture, like specifically in Cree culture, like there's no good or bad in terms of like, yes, winter is beautiful, but it's also dangerous. Like right now we're having a cold snap where it's like -40 with the wind chill, and like people are worried about a house population because of like how dangerous the cold is. And so that was something I was really happy. Van was our director of photography, and he was just like I really was so glad to have Van there because both me and Steph's background is in TV. So I wasn't really thinking about like, even though I was encouraging Steph to think about the film, like the film as capital M, I wasn't doing that either because I work in TV as well. So having Van there, who was always looking to see how he could make things more beautiful, was so welcoming to me, because I would look at the footage he shot later and I'll be like, oh my God, this is amazing. I know it's our film, but it's amazing.
Yeah, there was one moment in particular that stuck in my mind since watching the film. Uh, right as we're going through and beginning to dive into the suicide topic, there's an overhead shot of the convoy just driving along, and then a lone crow flies in. Is that exciting when you go back and look at the footage and you see a shot like that and you go, that perfectly captures what we want to convey in this story?
I mean, you'll have to talk to our editor, but there were many crow shots, and yeah, I can guarantee you there's a marker placed down on the timeline of the rushes every time a crow flew through. But Van loved the crows too.
Yes.
Like there was one or two, like we drove through a landfill at one time, and we did like 3 passes through because Van's like the crows are flying in and out constantly, and then I mean, and the way Van got a lot of those shots is he like stuck his head out of our sunroof, and it's -40, but with the wind -50, and he had his like big gloves and snow goggles and a big like hat he got up in a Nuvik on the earlier trip, and was freezing to death, but he stayed up there for like 10-minute stints because yeah, waiting for those crows. So you know what, I'm glad you noted. I'm glad you appreciated the crows. Yeah.
They're pretty cool. I love crows. They're one of my favorite animals. And yeah, Van was also really hilarious when we drove through that landfill 3 times, because he kept screaming like to try and get them to take flight, because they got so used to us so quickly that they weren't taking flight. And so he was just like screaming his head off while we're holding onto his belt so he doesn't fly out. And so I really love his attention to detail and how far he went for, because there's so many behind the scenes shots we have of Van where he's like elastic band man, and he's holding the camera like that trying to get the best shot. Like there's a shot of Tony and Wavell and Sean planning the card for the night, and the way Van got that shot was he was lying on the table looking up at them. It was like, so every time I see that shot now, it just makes me giggle because I remember how he got it.
It sounds like a pure passion project for everybody involved. It wasn't just,
Yeah.
let's just sort of half do everything. Everybody went as hard as possible.
Oh
Well, it
yeah, like
had to be. Well, sorry, Sonia, go for
oh,
it.
oh yeah, well, it was something I was really what really inspired me of the film, because because of this film, I only focus on projects now that I can give like not 95% of my attention to. Like God willing you get 100, but like I was just like because it was so fun. Like it never, even though the trip was hard, and it was a lot of the time, I almost got frostbite on my hand trying to chill a soda, but like it was everybody's commitment to what we were doing was so infectious that I was so happy to be there every single day. Even though I did leave a day early because I found out the sound guy got a flight out early. So I was like, I'm gonna get in that car. I'm not sleeping here tonight. So, but it was just really everybody's love for the film comes across so well. And I love when you can obviously tell in a film when somebody cared about it. And I think that comes across in ours. Sorry, Steph.
No, that's perfect. But I mean, it's been a passion project for everybody involved. Like, I mean, it took that, because going into this, everybody was warned. Like we will be working for 3 weeks straight. Probably, we will endeavor for some time off. But if things are going down, you know, I will probably, pull the camera out and, make a mess of everything. So we may as well just all go anyways. And so everyone was really, really into it from, I mean, from the coordinators before we left, our producers who have been, working on this tirelessly for, half a decade to our composer and our mixers at the end. Like everybody's really, been, it's been a passion project for everybody. Which is really unique. It's going to be hard to top.
Yeah. I want to make my next movie with Steph. I was thinking, I was like, damn, I got to get him on for my next one. But yeah.
I'm down.
And then speaking of the producers, you had Chris Jericho acting as an executive producer on the film, and also got to speak to Kenny Omega for the documentary as well. How important was it to have sort of those Canadian icons who have been through this tour in the past?
For me, initially, as the wrestling fan, whenever I'd see Jericho's name in the email chain, I would freak out a little each time, and I'd have to like, okay, calm down. He's just the executive producer. And when we got, I had known Omega through reputation, like not like I hadn't really seen any of his work. Like Omega is like Superman. You know something about him, even if you don't read the comics. And so he was like such a valuable asset in terms of like what knowledge he brought, and like we also got to meet a bunch of the AEW roster while we were filming Sean's match, which was so fun because I'm a huge fan of Jon Moxley, and I got to talk to him. So I was like, yay! But it was very cool to have the alumni talk about their experience, because sadly we couldn't include them all. We interviewed Dr. Luther and Don Callis, and we had like extensive, far more interview time with Jericho and with Omega. And I was basically telling Steph that we could have a documentary of the Death Tour, like we could have a Ken Burns documentary on just the AEW alumni on our trip up there, and then what happened afterwards. So it was just really cool to have that involvement.
And then especially in post too, it was great to be able to check in with Chris on the cut and like get the, because Sonya's a wrestling fan. I know nothing about wrestling, but it was good to get someone who was like a little, who experienced the tour, but a fresh set of eyes, who's got his, thumb on the pulse of the business to kind of wait, for feedback. So that was great.
Yeah, maybe if the documentary comes out on like DVD or Blu-ray, there's the special features of all the interviews.
Oh yeah, there's some great ones. Yeah.
And then lastly, the film has been selected for the Slam Dance Film Festival. How did it feel to get that news?
Very cool. Like I haven't imagined how far this film would go. And just to see the love that it gets is still very, very overwhelmingly happy for me. I just love it. So I'm just like taking it all in and basking in it, because I know like with our last interview we were asked like what are the plans for after, and I'm like, I'm just gonna enjoy now. Like we're gonna hang out, we're gonna have some food, hopefully. I was hearing from another publicist that there isn't a lot of like free food luncheons, but I'm planning to just like take it all in. But hearing the news was just like super cool. Plus I've never been to Utah, so I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I never dared, I mean, I barely let myself dream that it was going to get done. It sounds cliche, but it's very true. I always was just trying to manage my expectations to not get, not to get let down. But I think, yeah. And then so getting into Slam Dance was obviously just like a huge shock, and yeah, it was pretty emotional, but it still hasn't fully sunk in. I think once the wheels hit the ground, I think it'll finally hit, because right now, yeah, I haven't even packed my bags, haven't even thought about what I'm gonna wear yet. So yeah, pumped, but yeah, it hasn't sunk in. Yeah, it'll sink. You know what? I've been like slowly preparing for like the screening with a bunch of strangers next to me, and I know that it's all gonna come out there. Like Sonya, bring some Kleenex, because I'm for sure I'm gonna be losing it for sure. I think once we're finally there with everybody watching it and it's done, because it's just what I learned is it's a lot of work. I mean, it's it's a lot of work each step. I come from a TV background where everything moves a lot faster, and there's so many steps to this, and there's decisions to make every day, and every decision feels like life or death sometimes for the film, and you fight for it, And so I'm pretty tired, but ready to let it finally sink in.
Okay. And would another sort of wrestling documentary be something you would like to explore in the future, or do you want to branch out and look at other topics?
Well, everybody I want to do a documentary on already has one in development, because like one of my favorite wrestlers is Luna Vachon, and I was like, I would love to do a documentary on her, but then one of my good friends is right now working on one, and so I think I would love to make ones probably focusing on like more in probably about Stampede wrestling. I would love to look into, like it would depend on the context, just because I think what would draw me again into doing something like this documentary would be again that special formula. Yeah, it's about wrestling, but it's not about the wrestling. So yeah, like family dramas and that sort of thing. I would really love to, like, I won't say no to it, but I think would have to be very tempted.
Yeah, I it's funny, right after filming at the AEW, we filmed at Sean's AEW Dark match. And I remember in the hotel that night, after being in like the wings of an AEW production, I was like, I would do this again. There's a lot of story. I mean, there's a million stories I've been told, and I was like, there's something cool going on here. So I won't say no. I certainly no, I'd be totally open to it. Yeah.
Yeah, they had their backstage reality show, and I thought that was fantastic. So there's always fun stories to tell in the world of wrestling.
Exactly.
Alrighty, thank you both for joining me on the show this week. Why don't you go ahead and sort of let our audience know where the best place is to track both of your creative journeys and also to support the documentary.
Go ahead, Steph.
Well, thanks. Yeah. I have a website, stephanpeterson.ca, and the film is, you can follow us on socials. Search Death Tour Doc on Instagram and Facebook. I think I got that right,
Yeah.
Sonya? And
Death Tour Doc. Yeah.
Death Tour Doc. And there you go. You'll find all our updates, all the updates on screenings and tickets, and where the film will go next.
Same for me, like Sonya_Ballantyne on Instagram, Sonya Ballantyne on Twitter. I'm not going to call it X.
I don't either. That's okay.
Yeah. Death Tour Doc on Instagram, all the socials. Yeah, and just keep an eye out. We're hoping that we're hoping to have well, there'll be more screenings for sure. I just don't know them for sure yet. So yeah, keep an eye out and please come and see the film.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you for listening to the commentary booth. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe on podcast services and on YouTube. You can follow me on social media at JamieUpsMedia and at Pario Magazine. The commentary booth is a fan-funded production of Jamie Ups Media. You can support the podcast alongside our magazine, Pario Magazine, on Patreon at patreon.com/JamieUpsMedia. The following people supported at the publisher level or higher, and you cannot fathom how incredibly appreciative we are for their support.